I beg to move that this House do now adjourn.
The question is that this House do now adjourn. Preet, Kaur, Gill.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker, and it is a pleasure to speak on behalf of my constituents in this debate on crime in Birmingham, Edgbaston. I am pleased that I've been able to secure this debate, as this comes on the back of a spate of issues constituents have raised with me in the past number of years, which have appeared to be getting worse. In the West Midlands, neighbourhood crime has been steadily rising since 2020. While the title of this debate covers Birmingham Edgbaston, I know that the experiences and challenges we face in my constituency are felt across Birmingham and the whole of England. My constituency covers the wards of Edgbaston, North Edgbaston, Harborne, Quinton and Bartley Green. I start my remarks by focusing on an issue that has been an absolute stain on the lives of so many of my constituents in recent years: the rise in car-related crime. As the Minister will no doubt be aware, this is one of the many areas of crime where outcomes have steadily worsened over the past 14 years. By 2010-11, when Labour last left office, vehicle thefts in England and Wales had dropped to a third of what they were 10 years before. In the years since, numbers have risen again by a third to over 130,000. But while thefts have risen, the number of cases solved have not. Home Office data for the outcomes of reported crimes show that only 2% of car thefts recorded led to a suspect being charged or summoned. In total, this figure amounted to 3,378. 76% of car thefts were not solved last year. But what I really want to talk about today is not the headline statistics, as bleak as they are. I want to share some of the real stories behind the statistics, because debates about crime are not abstract. The experience of my constituents cannot be described by lines on a chart. The result of crime is often a life shattered, confidence shaken, and a trail of devastation in its wake, with the victim forced to pick up the pieces. A recurrent issue that is causing misery for many residents is car stripping. In 2022, one of my constituents, Toyota Aygo, was stripped at the parking bay at her residence. In the matter of 17 days, her replacement car was once again stripped. On that occasion, there was another car on the same compound that was stripped at the same time. My constituent's neighbour was a witness to the latter incident, and she called the police as she watched someone pick apart these cars in real time, but was apparently told by the police that they were far too busy. As my constituent put it, I am on a state pension and I live alone. This has caused me financial problems. But more than that, it has left me emotionally and mentally exhausted. I feel if I was to buy or borrow a car, that the same would happen again. The police had a great opportunity to catch the criminals and at least send a message to others. I received another similar case from a member of a street watch group in Harborne. A constituent had their car targeted 4 times in 1 year and swapped to another car as their Toyota Yaris was uninsurable. Their new car was stripped in less than a week. A constituent from the same area contacted me to raise that a resident on their road had seen one of these incidents taking place in broad daylight. She immediately rang the police. Despite informing the police she was witnessed the incident before her eyes, and there being a police station around the corner, she was informed to simply log the incident online. Madam Deputy Speaker, the impact these crimes have on people's lives shouldn't be understated. I want to share the story of another one of my constituents who works within the NHS at the Queen Elizabeth Hospital in my constituency. She says, "Last Thursday afternoon, on my return to my vehicle, after a long day in clinic, I discovered that my new car of only 4 months had been stolen. Although my insurance is fully comprehensive, I am not entitled to a courtesy car, as it has not been involved in a car crash or been vandalised, and funds to cover the cost of the vehicle will not be paid out until at least 30 days have passed, in case the car is recovered. As you can imagine, I'm devastated, and this will impact my working day as well as my life outside massively. In our department alone, a small team of 11, she says, we have personally experienced break-ins, stolen belongings, vandalism, damage, a stolen catalytic converter from my previous car 6 months ago, and now vehicle theft. We've all been witnesses to multiple cases of car cannibalism and of other Queen Elizabeth Hospital staff too. The only members of the team who haven't been directly affected are those who arrive very early and as a result are able to obtain on-site parking. There has also been multiple cases of car theft and vandalism amongst the wider department staff. you can see this isn't just isolated incidents, but a pattern of worsening, more frequent and more brazen crime. For the victims like these hospital workers, it is devastating. It turns the ordinary people's lives upside down and takes them away from otherwise contributing to society, whether that's working in the NHS, looking after their families or supporting their community. But particularly when so many crimes go unresponded and unsolved, crime has a poisonous impact on our society as a whole, because it shakes our confidence in the very people and institutions that we are meant to trust to keep us safe. Take Katie, who again found her car stripped. She said reporting to the police for reasons that might be resource-related has been inconsequential, and thieves seem to know that, given their increased audacity and frequency of such incidents. This is simply a call for help, since my neighbours and myself are growing increasingly hopeless. All of this contributes to a growing sense of despair that nothing in this country works anymore. Burglaries are another increasing issue. It is bad enough to have one's car stripped or stolen, but it is uniquely disturbing to know that strangers have broken into and stolen from your own home. There is a unique sense of violation and fear that so many victims share with me when they find they've been burgled. Take one constituent who contacted me. They told me, my wife was home when miscreants broke into the house, and since then we don't feel safe in our own home. During this week, as many as 3 more burglaries have taken place. No house which is locked even for a few hours during the day is safe. Police officials come and do the formalities of paperwork, and rest we don't know. In Quinton, we have faced a spate of burglaries, even as families are at home eating dinner and during the day. Residents have told me they've noticed how much more brazen criminals have become, as they don't care if one person is in or if whole families are at home. This has left residents terrified in their own homes. Almost all of them have ring doorbells, but this does not seem to deter the culprits. The point I'm making is that the fear that crime puts into victims lasts so much longer than the time taken to experience and report the crime. And as you can hear from these testimonies, there is a sense that this is a country where certain forms of crime simply happen without any consequence. It feeds a sense of isolation, hopelessness and powerlessness that is corrosive to the society we surely want to create. So that is why I have applied for this debate, and I'm raising these stories now in the hope that the Minister can give my constituents some reassurance that the government is taking this seriously and the perpetrators of these crimes will see justice. On car cannibalism especially, we know that parts are often stolen to order and passed on for the valuable materials they contain. Previously, ministers have suggested that they would consider a review of the Scrap Metal Dealers Act 2013 if necessary. I asked the Minister today if he would consider this. Can he tell me what additional funding the government has made available to tackle illegal unlicensed operators in the metals recycling sector and launch a wider campaign to tackle this crime? I appreciate that the Minister may mention the National Police Chiefs Council Metal Crime Steering Group, but can he explain what actions have been implemented as a result of recommendations from this group recently, and how does it actually measure its outcomes? The National Crime Agency has referred to an overall increase in organised, acquisitive crime, including car theft. This was evident in the shocking 30% rise in car theft in just the most recent year. That is according to the Home Office's own statistics. Why does the Minister think his government have failed to prevent serious organised crime groups from taking hold across Britain's towns and high streets? A frequent concern that my constituents often raise is that they do not feel that police are resourced adequately to handle the crimes that they report and have to deal with. And what's more, that there is not the reassuring community police presence needed to deter these criminals in the first place. And when 4,500 police community support officers have been cut since 2015, and only 12% of officers are assigned to neighbourhood policing teams, they have a point, don't they? Over the past 14 years, the government have overseen a litany of broken promises on policing across England. The decision to cut 20,000 experienced police officers before trying to replace them with vastly less experienced officers was just one of a catalogue of errors. But it has a lasting impact on people's trust in the police. I've heard my colleagues talk about the glory days when they had 5 or 6 police officers and police community support officers in every ward, and currently having to fight to get numbers increased. Meanwhile, the number of arrests has halved, prosecutions almost halved, the number of crimes solved halved, more crimes are being reported, but fewer crimes are being solved. And criminals are getting away with it on this government's watch. This accompanies cuts to youth services and other institutions set up to support young people and reduce the causes of crime in our communities. After years of Tory austerity, youth services in Birmingham have been starved of the resources they desperately need. The total core budget for youth service last year was just 2.1 million, and there are currently just 25 full-time equivalent youth workers providing services to around 120,000 teenagers across the city. That's just 1 to every 4,600 teens. And young people in my constituency deserve better. They should have the same opportunities as every child across the country to develop and thrive. And that's why the next Labour government will launch Young Futures, a new cross-government national programme aimed at giving Britain's young people the best start to life, with a specific strand of activity targeted at those young people most at risk of being drawn into violent crime and delivering support for young people struggling with their mental health. In my patch, the high number of serious violent offences has become a persistent problem. Everyone has a right to feel safe and secure in their communities, but many of my constituencies heartbreakingly do not. In 2021, our city was shaken to its core by the murder of my constituent, D. John Reid, aged 14. D. John's attackers chased after him in a car, yelled racist slurs at him, and then hunted him down like a pack of animals, a child. D. John's death was horrifying. He was a much-loved young boy, with so much ahead of him. To lose him in such a sudden and brutal way is heartrending. D. John was a victim of knife crime, and he's far from being the only one. Last month, it was reported that the West Midlands Police Force has the highest knife crime rate in England and Wales. And last year, Birmingham was named the gun capital of the UK, overtaking London to have the highest gun crime rate in the country. Gun crime has increasingly emerged as a problem which haunts my constituents. Just last September in Quinton, residents were terrorised after a drive-by shooting took place on a residential street in broad daylight. In North Edgbaston too, a constituent wrote to me after robbers jumped into her garden and tried to break into her home, and after failing to enter her property, the gang held up her neighbours, who were only students, at gunpoint. Can the Minister explain what he is doing to tackle the surge in gun crime in Birmingham? And can he explain how he expects my constituents to feel safe and secure in their homes and communities when neighbourhood police forces have been decimated and crime continues to rise? Today, I'd also like to raise the catastrophic effects of dangerous driving, speeding, car cruising and off-road bike usage that many of my constituents repeatedly experience. Just yesterday morning, a child in my constituency was taken to hospital after being hit by a car during rush hour on a road in Bartley Green. This road is where that poor child was hit is notoriously bad for speeding, and I've raised my concerns multiple times with the council and the police. However, I have had repeatedly been told that this is not a priority for speed calming measures. This shines a light on just how speeding impacts people's lives in my patch and how scarce resources are for tackling this blight in our communities. In Quinton, residents write to me regularly about the scale of street racing, speeding and dangerous driving on their roads. Last year, 2 young girls, aged 4 and 2 years old, were hit by a car on West Boulevard. The year before that, again, 2 young boys were injured after a minibus they were passengers in crashed with 2 other vehicles. Pedestrians don't feel safe with so many crashes happening on our roads. Off-road bikes have also been a cause of serious concern for my constituents. Recently, a constituent of mine wrote to me saying that the issue of people riding off-road vehicles in his neighbourhood is escalating as the offenders with illegal off-road motorcycles are now carrying offensive weapons. He said, I am now regularly reporting the incidents, but still at this stage, nothing is happening to seize these bikes. I've taken this matter to the top of government, asking the Home Office what assessment they have made of the adequacy of the powers and resources available to the police to deal with the illegal use of quad bikes. And the government said the police have adequate powers under the Road Traffic Act 1988 and Police Reform Act 2002 to seize vehicles being driven illegally. Of course, what matters here, though, Minister, is resources and officer numbers, something I raised with the government last year when I wrote to the Home Secretary asking when our region will see investment in resources and officer numbers. So can the Minister tell me what exactly his government is doing to tackle dangerous driving on our roads? And does the Minister accept that the police might not effectively have adequate powers to combat speeding and seize vehicles driven illegally if resources have been and continue to be slashed? And of course, average speed cameras, again, this is a resource issue. I will close my remarks with the comments of another of my constituents. She says, I've lived here in Quinton most of my life and can honestly say I've never seen crime so bad to what it is now. There is constant racing on the West Boulevard and up and down my road, including near the school where a young child was run over. There's been a stabbing on the road. There's been several cannabis farms and the road always seems to smell of cannabis. There was a serious assault in the early hours Saturday morning with the offender residing in the HMO. There is a vulnerable adult residing at the bottom of the road where the local drug dealer uses his property as a hangout. This is a similar story across Edgbaston, Bartley Green, Harborne and North Edgbaston. I know in other areas the police assist with CCTV or mobile cameras to assist with catching offenders. Can this not be an option for my road? In a plea to catch local offenders and make residents feel safe again. Minister, that's directly from my constituent. Despite the repeated calls from families across Birmingham, Edgbaston, throughout the country, criminals are not being caught or paying the price. 90% of crimes are going unsolved. 2 million crimes were dropped with no suspect being identified, including a shocking 74% of burglaries. That is the shameful Tory legacy on criminal justice. We simply can't afford to carry on like this. Of course, Labour's made a really important pledge to get back neighbourhood policing back into communities, 13,000 more extra police officers and PCSOs, guaranteeing patrols in our town centres and tackling knife crime as part of our mission to halve serious violence. But I also want to, on record, pay thanks to my local police officers for everything that they do with the limited resources that they have. I'm also grateful to our new Chief Constable, who has agreed to prioritising neighbourhood policing. But the West Midlands has had 2,200 police officers cut, and we are still 800 short. Fundamentally, people don't feel safe and don't feel they get justice as victims of crime under this government's watch. Thank you.
Minister Chris Philp.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker, and I'd like to congratulate the Honourable Member for Birmingham Edgbaston for securing this evening's debate. Let me start by providing just some national context before answering some of the questions that she answered. She mentioned a number of crime figures in her speech. And it's important to put on record that there are two sets of crime statistics that are published. There is police recorded crime, which are the figures that she is quoting, and then there is the crime survey of England and Wales produced by the Office for National Statistics. Now, the police recorded crime figures depend, of course, on the propensity of the public to report and then how good a job the police do in recording those crimes. And over the last 5 or 7 years, the police have become a lot better at recording all of the crimes reported to them, which is why those numbers have gone up. But the Office for National Statistics tell us that the most reliable set of figures for long-term crime trends are not the police-recorded crime figures for the reasons that I just set out. They depend on the public's propensity to report and the police's ability to then record, but the crime survey. And let me just give her some of the crime survey figures since 2010. She mentioned that as a reference period. So all crime on a like-for-like basis has come down by 54% since 2010, according to the Independent Office for National Statistics. Violence down by 46%, theft down by 47%, domestic burglary down by 55%, and vehicle theft down by 39%. A lot more to do, particularly on shoplifting and vehicle crime and knife crime, which I'll come to in a moment, but the overall trends for crime are down. In relation to resources that she mentioned a few times, across England and Wales as a whole, we now have record ever numbers of police officers. Last year, we reached, on March the 31st, 149,566 police officers. That is more than we've ever had before, and it surpasses the previous peak, which was in March 2010, by about 3,500 officers. So we have record ever police numbers, and those have, broadly speaking, maintained since that record was reached in March of last year. Now, in terms of the West Midlands specifically, their budget last year, I think, was 790, or this year rather, was £790 million. That's an increase of £51 million year on year, or about 6.4%, so considerably higher than the current rate of inflation. And I think many of the questions that she is asking are questions that she should be addressing to Simon Foster, the Police and Crime Commissioner for the West Midlands, who somehow managed to get re-elected a couple of weeks ago, because he's got those financial resources. And whereas other police authorities or police areas around the country have hit record ever numbers, and we've done so in total, that has not happened in the West Midlands. And that is a question I would strongly encourage her to ask Mr. Foster foster now that he has somehow got himself re-elected. Now, the Honourable Lady asked a number of questions about some specific crime types, and she went through quite a long list. So I'm just going to very quickly go through some of the more important of those. So she mentioned, for example, knife crime, now which is a concern. Knife crime, in terms of people getting admitted to hospital with an injury by a knife, has come down by 26% in the last 5 years. But there is further to go. London is actually conspicuously much worse than the rest of the country. In the rest of the country, a lot more progress is being made. There's an exception in London. But we're doing quite a lot to combat this. One is encouraging the greater use of stop and search, done, of course, respectfully. But that takes knives off the streets, and we would welcome cross-party support for the police to use stop and search lawfully more to get those dangerous knives off the street. Secondly, we're investing in various forms of technology. In fact, I was with a company just this lunchtime, an American company, which is developing new technology that can scan somebody walking down a street to see whether or not they're carrying a knife, and it can distinguish a knife from a mobile phone or something else. And it's not quite ready to deploy yet, but I think this year it will be ready to deploy experimentally, and that could, I think, really revolutionise our ability to sort of look at a crowd and detect who in that crowd is carrying a knife, and then make sure they're stopped, the knife is taken off them, and they are arrested. But we're also doing quite a lot of work on prevention. She mentioned youth services. Birmingham City Council obviously notoriously went bankrupt. But we are funding, the Home Office is directly funding violence reduction units to the tune of more than £50 million a year across the country, who are designed to work with young people to help them, whether it's with mentoring, work experience, it could be cognitive behavioural therapy, youth activities, sometimes in partnership with football clubs, to try and get them onto a better path. The Youth Endowment Fund does lots of work here. They've got £200 million, and I commend the work of John Yates, who's the chief executive. And from next year, there's going to be I think a £75 million increase in violence reduction unit funding over 3 years. That's around about a 50% increase, because, as she says, supporting those young people is so important. We're also going to be piloting this autumn with the Youth Endowment Fund a new initiative to try and identify, let's say, the sort of 50 or so young people who are sort of early teenagers who are most at risk of getting into serious violence and serious crime, looking at a range of indicators. Could be mental health, education, housing, an older sibling who might be involved in a gang, those sort of indicators that go beyond just criminal justice. So interventions can be made to stop that sort of potentially vulnerable or at-risk 12 or 13-year-old turning into a potentially violent 17 or 18-year-old. And that initiative, I think, has the potential to make a real difference. She talked about car crime, and crime more widely, which is a concern. I met recently with the chief executive of Jaguar Land Rover on exactly this point. And on car crime, we're stepping up the work in that area, working with the NPCC lead, Assistant Chief Constable Jenny Sims of the Merseyside Force. We're going to do more work at the border to stop the export of cars. Often they're stolen and rapidly exported in containers to countries like the United Arab Emirates or the Democratic Republic of the Congo. So we're going to do work to stop that export at the border. We're also going to be increasing the amount of intelligence work done to spot patterns, identify organised criminal gangs who often are stealing these cars. Briefly, yeah.
I just want to say to the Minister that what I was sharing, the testimonies are so powerful, because this is people's experience of being victims of crime. And what they say is, given that the West Midlands is still 800 police officers short, that the resource just isn't there, that actually they're given a crime reference number and that is it. That doesn't make people feel safe. I know he's talking about youth crime and the various initiatives, but actually youth services have been decimated. There isn't anywhere for young people to go, and so they get exploited because there isn't the opportunities around good jobs, training. That's the kind of things that young people need, hope and aspiration.
I mean, of course, youth unemployment is a great deal lower today than it was under the last Labour government. On the question of resources, I mean, that and police numbers in the West Midlands, as I mentioned, the Police and Crime Commissioner in the West Midlands has £51 million extra this year compared to last year. So she ought to be asking him, ideally publicly, the question as to what he's spending that money on and why he's not addressing the issues that she's raising. And I agree with her. Car crime and other crimes do affect the victim terribly, and that is why police have now committed across the whole country, but including, of course, in the West Midlands, to always follow reasonable lines of inquiry where they exist, including in relation to car crime. And one of the big changes that are technological changes that we're going to be exploiting and are exploiting already is retrospective facial recognition. So if you have if a victim has an image of an offender, that could be a Ring doorbell image, it could be a mobile phone photograph of someone taking a car, it could be CCTV footage from a shop where shoplifting has occurred. If there's an image of an offender, even if it's blurred or partially obscured, that can now be run through the Police National Database for a match. And the facial recognition algorithm is now extremely accurate. And that is a way that we are already catching a lot more criminals, including some involved in car crime. So I would encourage victims, if they've got a picture of a suspect, to please make sure they give it to the police, because they have committed to always, not sometimes, but always run that through the facial recognition database. And they've committed to always, again, not sometimes, but always follow up reasonable lines of inquiry where they exist. And for all crimes, even crimes that some people would consider historically to be minor. That was a commitment made last September, and it's vital that the police deliver that commitment to support victims for the reasons that she set out. I'll give way one more time.
Will the Minister give an example? Thank you. Will the Minister give an example of where that's actually been used? Because I've never known to this day where even residents are sending images and they seem to be blurred. The police are actually very clear that they can't do anything with that. So can you tell me how many forces are using this and when was there a conviction?
I mean, there have been. I wonder how much longer I've got. Anyway, it's been used across the whole country. So this year, over 100,000.
Just to answer the honourable gentleman's question, he has until 7:30, which is some 57 minutes. It is, of course, a matter for the Minister's discretion as to how long he takes in his speech, but I'm putting no pressure on him. Minister.
Speaker, I am tempted to use all 57 minutes, and I'm sure the Honourable Lady has interventions that would take up a fair chunk of that, but I think I will be a lot briefer, which I'm sure will be popular with colleagues. So in relation to the use of retrospective facial recognition, it's being used thousands of times every month, and there are all kinds of examples of it being used successfully. For example, there was a murder in a Coventry nightclub committed a couple of years ago. The only piece of evidence in relation to that was a photograph taken in the nightclub of the suspect, and running that through the Police National Database, they got a match. The police went to the suspect's address and found the suspect there with clothes that were covered in the victim's blood, and he's now been convicted. So there are hundreds of examples just from the last few months of retrospective facial recognition being used. As I say, if it's blurred or it's dark, it can often be matched. Obviously, there does need to be some sort of image they can look at, but it is remarkable, actually, the images that can now be matched using that algorithm. So I would just really strongly encourage everybody to send in those images to the police, and if the police don't run them through the facial recognition database, to push them, ask why, and push the police to do so, because they have committed to that. We are also now deploying live facial recognition, where suspects who may be wandering around a high street can get identified and essentially arrested using live facial recognition near train stations, high streets and so on. So technology, I've mentioned knife scanning as well, facial recognition has the potential to really, in the coming years and months, it's not a long way, it's being used now, to really transform the way that we can catch criminals and do a better job for victims. She also asked about scrap metal, and interestingly enough, I had a meeting today with the all-party parliamentary group on scrap metal, chaired, I think, by my honourable friend, the member for Bedford South West, but Lord Burt, who's a member of the APPG from the Lords, attended as well, and we discussed what more we can do. The level of scrap metal theft, they estimate it's about £500 million a year. It was, when the Scrap Metal Act was passed in 2013, in fact by my predecessor, Sir Richard Ottaway, as a private member's bill, was about £800 million a year. So it has come down by over a third by value since 2013. But we'd like to go further. And she mentioned the NPCC group on metal theft. So it is my intention to invite myself to that group and attend it at its next meeting, which I think is on the 11th of June, just to press for more action in this area. Catalytic converters and the theft of lead are the areas that are of most pressing concern. She mentioned, I think, briefly shoplifting, but that is a matter of extreme concern. And there is a police national retail crime plan, which includes a plan to target prolific shoplifters and to follow those reasonable lines of inquiry, including always running the pictures from CCTV through the facial recognition database. And the government published its own additional action plan just a couple of weeks ago, which includes meeting calls from members of this House, the union USDAW and others, to create a standalone offence of assaulting a retail worker, which I think has been widely welcomed. Madam Deputy Speaker, you'll be relieved to hear I'm not taking up all 57 minutes. I hope I've set out the actions being taken, but more importantly, the results being delivered. There are some disappointing things in the West Midlands, but I know the Honourable Lady will take those up with the PCC, Simon Foster, and ask him what he's doing with that £51 million extra he's got this year. But I will work constructively with her and with other colleagues to make sure that our communities are kept safe.
Thank you. The question is that this House do now adjourn. As mayors that opinion, say aye. Aye. I think the ayes have it. The ayes have it. Order. Order.
The proceeding has ended. 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 The proceeding has ended.